The glass walls of the towering corporate headquarters shimmered under the afternoon sun, a beacon of power and wealth. Inside, behind a massive mahogany desk, Adrian Locke leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming impatiently against the polished surface. CEO of Locke Enterprises, he was a man who prided himself on results, wealth, and above all, control. "Get him in here," Adrian barked to his assistant, Melissa, without looking up from his screen. Melissa hesitated, her fingers clutching the clipboard just a bit too tightly. "Sir, I really don't think." "Now, Melissa." She nodded stiffly and exited the office, her heels clicking against the pristine marble floor. Outside, near the janitor's supply closet, she found the man in question, James Carter. James was wiping down a spill near the vending machines, his movements precise yet unhurried. The man was in his late 50s, but his broad shoulders and straight posture made him look a decade younger. His face was lined, but not with age, with experience. A few co-workers greeted him warmly as they passed, grateful for his quiet presence. "James," Melissa said softly. "The CEO wants to see you." James glanced up from his work, eyes sharp and unreadable. He gave a small nod, set his mop aside, and followed her. Inside the office, Adrian didn't even glance up as James entered. He was busy scrolling through reports on his computer, eyes narrowing at a list of expenses. Finally, he exhaled loudly and turned toward the janitor. "You're Carter?" he asked, as though James was just another insignificant number in his reports. James nodded. "Yes, sir." Adrian leaned forward, folding his hands together. "I've been looking through the company financials. There's no easy way to say this, so I'll be blunt, we need to cut costs. And frankly, paying for janitorial services at the level we are is absurd. You're the most senior cleaner here, which makes you the most expensive." Melissa shifted uncomfortably by the door, her gaze darting between the two men. "So," Adrian continued, his voice filled with the smug certainty of a man who had never been challenged, "you're fired. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out." James studied the CEO for a long moment. His face remained impassive, but there was a shift in his stance, an almost imperceptible straightening of the shoulders, a subtle squaring of his frame. "Understood," James said simply. Melissa opened her mouth, but no words came out. "That's it?" Adrian smirked. "No argument? No begging for your job?" James shrugged. "You made up your mind." Adrian chuckled, shaking his head. "Wow. Not even going to ask why? Maybe if you had a little more ambition, Carter, you wouldn't be pushing a mop at your age." Melissa sucked in a sharp breath. For the first time, James' gaze hardened. But he said nothing. He turned and walked out the door. Adrian didn't give the janitor another thought. The week moved on, and he found himself immersed in the relentless grind of corporate dominance. Meetings, deals, power plays, it was what he lived for. But then, strange things began happening. It started small. A deal he had been working on for months suddenly fell through. The other company pulled out at the last minute, citing concerns they refused to elaborate on. Then, an anonymous source leaked internal emails that painted Locke Enterprises in a less than flattering light, sparking outrage online. His personal assistant, Melissa, abruptly quit, leaving only a short resignation letter on her desk. Security footage showed that someone had been in the building after hours, despite all entry logs showing nothing unusual. A chilling realization crept over Adrian: whoever had been inside knew how to bypass every system, every alarm. Then, the phone call came. Late one evening, as Adrian sat in his office nursing a glass of whiskey, his private line rang. "Locke," he answered, irritated. A pause. Then, a voice he recognized. "You're a hard man to impress, Mr. Locke." Adrian froze. "Carter?" James' voice was calm. "I didn't care about the job, you know. But you're the kind of man who walks over people just because he can. That kind of arrogance has a cost." Adrian's pulse spiked. He forced a laugh. "Are you threatening me, Carter?" Silence. And then? Not at all, James said, his tone even. Just making sure you understand something. A dull thud echoed through the office. Adrian looked up. His security team, the men he had hired personally, were standing outside his glass door. But they weren't alone. They were on their knees. Behind them stood men in tactical gear, faces unreadable. Adrian shot to his feet. What the hell? James' voice cut through the moment. You never asked what I did before this job, Locke. You assumed. Adrian's mouth went dry. James continued. I served in the Special Forces for 25 years. Black Ops, counterterrorism, infiltration. Men like me, we don't disappear into nothing. We choose where we go. Adrian staggered back, his heart hammering. You, James went on, chose wrong. The call cut off. And the office door swung open. Adrian's mind raced, but his body refused to move. His legs felt like they had been cemented to the floor as he stared at the men standing behind his security team. These weren't just thugs or mercenaries, they had the stance, the silence, the absolute control that only came with years of training at the highest level. The head of his security, Daniels, looked shaken. Adrian had never seen him like that before. A man who had served in private security firms for decades now knelt on the ground, disarmed and powerless. One of the men in tactical gear took a step forward. No insignia, no name tag. Just a presence that sent cold terror through Adrian's veins. Then James entered. Gone was the quiet janitor in work clothes. He wore a simple black shirt, a tactical vest slung over his broad shoulders. His movements were fluid, effortless, like a predator stepping into his domain. He was in complete control, and Adrian knew it. Adrian forced his voice to work. What do you want? Money? Power? I can fix this, whatever this is. You're making a mistake, Carter. James tilted his head slightly, as if considering the words. A mistake, he mused. Funny, I was thinking the same thing when you fired me. Adrian swallowed hard. Okay. You've made your point. But if you hurt me... James let out a short, almost amused breath. Hurt you? He took another step forward, hands in his pockets, completely at ease. No, Locke. I don't need to do that. You've already done enough damage to yourself. Adrian blinked. What? You like control, James continued. You built your empire by controlling everything around you. But control is an illusion. It only lasts as long as the people beneath you allow it to. The room seemed to close in around Adrian. His throat felt dry, his palms sweaty. What did you do? He whispered. James glanced at one of the men behind him. The man nodded and tossed a tablet onto Adrian's desk. The screen lit up with a video, security footage from earlier that day. But it wasn't just any footage. It was Adrian himself. Every underhanded deal, every time he cut corners, every time he belittled or manipulated someone, compiled, edited, and timestamped for the world to see. Adrian's stomach dropped. No, he breathed. James watched him carefully. You see, Locke, men like you think they're untouchable. You think no one sees what happens behind closed doors. But someone always does. Adrian lunged for the tablet, but James grabbed his wrist with lightning-fast reflexes. The grip was firm. Unbreakable. Adrian winced. James leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You fired a janitor, he said, his tone carrying the weight of something far more dangerous. But you disrespected a soldier. With that, he released Adrian and stepped back. The tablet screen flashed again. The video had already been uploaded. News networks were picking it up. Social media was exploding. Adrian Locke, the untouchable CEO, had just lost everything. And James Carter? He was already walking away. Adrian's breath came in short, ragged gasps as he stared at the screen. His entire career, his empire, was crumbling in real time. The comments flooded in beneath the video, a tidal wave of outrage and disgust. Employees he had fired, business partners he had screwed over, even shareholders, everyone was piling on, exposing more of his dirty secrets. He reached for his phone with trembling fingers, dialing his lawyer. It rang once. Twice. Then straight to voicemail. No. He tried another number, his PR team. Same result. His hands clenched into fists. He wasn't going down like this. His gaze snapped back to James, who stood calm and composed, watching the unraveling of a man who once believed himself invincible. You think this is over? Adrian hissed, his voice a mixture of desperation and fury. I have connections. Money. You have no idea who you're messing with. James' expression didn't change. If anything, there was a trace of pity in his eyes. You don't get it, do you? James said, shaking his head. This isn't about money. This isn't about revenge. It's about consequences. Adrian slammed his fist against the desk. You're just a damn janitor. James chuckled, a low, knowing sound that made the hairs on the back of Adrian's neck stand up. You keep telling yourself that, James said. But I was never just a janitor. And now, you? You're no longer a CEO. The words hit harder than Adrian expected. He turned back to the screen, his world disintegrating by the second. His board of directors had already released a statement, distancing themselves from him. Investors were pulling out. Stock prices were in free fall. Then, the final blow. An email notification popped up. Termination of contract. Effective immediately. Adrian Locke had just been fired from his own company. His knees nearly buckled. He braced himself against the desk, his mind reeling. This wasn't possible. It wasn't happening. He looked up, but James was already walking toward the door. You think this makes you a hero? Adrian spat, his voice raw. James paused, glancing over his shoulder. No, he said simply. I'm just a man who cleaned up a mess. Then, without another word, he disappeared through the door, leaving Adrian Locke to drown in the ruins of his own making. Adrian slumped into his chair, his mind racing in frantic circles, searching for a way out. But there was none. Every avenue, every escape route he had ever relied on, his wealth, his power, his influence, was gone. The phone rang, and for a brief second, hope flared in his chest. He snatched it up without checking the caller ID. Hello? His voice was hoarse, desperate. You really screwed up, Locke. Adrian's stomach dropped. He recognized the voice immediately, his biggest investor, a ruthless billionaire who had backed Locke Enterprises for years. Wait, this isn't what it looks like, Adrian rushed out. It's all blown out of proportion. I can fix this. You can't fix anything, the voice cut in coldly. We've pulled our funding. The board has already voted. You're out, effective immediately. And Adrian? Adrian swallowed hard. Why You should lay low. A lot of people are looking for you now. People you don't want knocking on your door. The line went dead. Adrian's grip slackened, and the phone slipped from his hand, clattering onto the desk. The weight of reality came crashing down. His empire was gone. His allies had abandoned him. Soon, law enforcement would come knocking, and even if they didn't, the people he had wronged over the years would. For the first time in his life, he felt truly powerless. A movement caught his eye. James stood outside the glass walls of his office, looking in. Not smug, not vengeful, just watching. Adrian forced himself to stand, to summon what little pride he had left. He strode to the glass and glared at James, hands shaking but jaw set. What now? He spat. You just walk away? Pretend this never happened? James studied him for a long moment, then gave the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. That's the difference between you and me, James said, his voice calm. I know when to walk away. Then, just like that, he turned and left. Adrian watched him disappear down the hall, the sound of his footsteps fading into nothing. For the first time in his life, Adrian Locke was truly alone. If you enjoyed this story and want more powerful tales like this one, don't forget to hit subscribe to American Stories on YouTube, where every story has a lesson, and every voice matters.